Previously in the Stretch Duck 7 video, I alluded to the fact that Boston is utilizing old Army ducks, which is actually not true and totally on me for not delving into that further. I've had the pleasure of being in direct contact with the Chief Engineering Officer at Boston Duck Tours for the past couple weeks, and I asked him a few questions that he could see if he would comment on, and he was willing. We discussed it in more detail, and before we get to today's incident, I'd like to clarify a few items on the Boston fleet that really surprised me, and how much attention to detail, innovation, and safety measures they've implemented into their amphibious tours. But this isn't a paid segment, it's not an endorsement or disapproval. I'll be honest though, it's refreshing to see this much attention to safety in this particular industry, and differs greatly from the standard that the now defunct Ride the Ducks had kind of set inadvertently due to being so popular and then so infamous. They do look similar to those used and modified by Ride the Ducks International, both in size and overall structure, but if you've been following the lore of how these vessels came about, the NTSB in Duck 7's report focused on three main categories of modified ducks, as these made up most of Branson's fleet. The original ducks, not stretched or at least not so heavily modified as to change their overall proportions, still have been restored and modified within their footprint though, referred to as both fleet ducks or original ducks. And at the opposite end of the NTSB's chart here is the truck duck. This vessel is built on the more modern 6x6 military truck known as the M35. The M35 was the successor to the old CCKW platform, the old DUKW being a derivative of the CCKW. Built from the ground up though, specifically for tourism, according to my contact at Boston Duck Tours, in 2006 we began the conversion of our fleet from World War II ducks and 3 stretch ducks to the truck duck. We retired our last World War II duck in 2014 and have a fleet of 28 truck ducks. The truck duck is similar to the master jig duck shown in the NTSB chart in your video that showed the different hull forms. It was the successor to the stretch duck. While the stretch duck is a World War II duck under its skin, the truck duck is a completely new vehicle based on the modified chassis of an M35. The beam is wider, the buoyancy is far greater, the rear bilges are larger, the gunnel is much higher, the hull steel is thicker, etc. In our opinion, it's a much better and safer vehicle for tourism. And that was quoting Boston Duck Tours. Also noting, he noted the side curtain design has them attached when in use only by Velcro, easily pushed away in an emergency. The front cattle pusher bar is an added safety feature for road-going use. The vessel is surrounded by cameras for a full 360 view, especially crucial when navigating the on-road portion. And most importantly, their unique roof design allows these separate panels to slide open above the passenger compartments in the stern and amidships. And the location Boston Duck Tours utilized for their water transit, the Charles River, is vastly different than where both the Branson ducks and Philly ducks were operating. We'll be learning all about how location played such a vital role in today's Duck 34 video, and we'll touch on the Charles River in contrast at that time. So keep in mind, the Ride the Ducks brand is defunct. The Guam Duck Tours still carry the name, but are likely unaffiliated with the previous Ride the Ducks International, as it was known. And yes, Ride the Ducks was, and in a way still is, synonymous with basically all duck tours, like Kleenex brand for tissues. But Ride the Ducks was a specific brand, and modern duck tours today have their own brand name, like Boston Duck Tours, Branson Duck Tours, and so on. This is in response to the overwhelming amount of comments telling me there's Ride the Ducks still operating here, there's Ride the Ducks still operating there, when simply referring to amphibious tours that are still in business. Just because those are amphibious passengers tours does not mean they're Ride the Ducks brand. This is an unfortunate side effect, I think, of Ride the Ducks' popularity and then infamy. So I just want to clarify that. All right, everyone, as they say on the YouTubes, let's get into it.
To the northbound tug in front of Penn's Landing, this is Duck 34. I am at anchor. I am unable to maneuver. I am broken down. Over. The northbound barge in front of Penn's Landing, please come back. The northbound tug Hey, ferry, whoa, 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 whoa!
Hey, northbound barge at Penn's Landing, that tugboat is broken down. Northbound tug and barge going past Penn's Landing, this is Freedom. Coast Guard Sector Philadelphia, this is Freedom.
Vessel Freedom, this is Coast Guard Sector Delaware Bay, over.
Yes, sir, one of the tugboats off Penn's Landing just got, looks like they got run over by a barge and wanted to pick them up.
Roger, Captain. How many persons are in the water, over?
No idea, I don't have time to talk to you right now, I'm going to get the people.
Pon. Hello, all stations. This is United States Coast Guard, Sector Delaware Bay. United States Coast Guard, Delaware Bay. At 1437 local time, the Coast Guard received a report of 30 people in the water off of Penn's Landing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All vessels in the area are requested to keep a sharp lookout, assist if possible, and report all sightings to the United States Coast Guard.
In the tragedy aboard Stretch Duck 7, we saw just how normalized the neglect of safety, maintenance, and modifications became in the world of Ride the Ducks tour boats. And while I did cover extensively several incidents leading up to the Duck 7's case, I was this close to keeping the mention of Duck 34's incident in that video, but I just couldn't. As I read further into it, Ride the Ducks Philadelphia's maintenance issues take a back seat to the outright negligence in seafaring and maritime operation that day, especially aboard the Tugboat Caribbean Sea, but to an extent, aboard Duck 34 as well. As for the modified Army Duck tour boats, to summarize, for those who haven't seen the backstory, links will be in description for those who'd like to get caught up later. These vessels were purpose-built for World War II amphibious operations and intended to have a lifespan of only a few months. Once World War II was over, they were quickly sold off as surplus by the thousands. And since they were already a handful to operate and maintain, even by those trained specifically in their use as military vehicles, it required that much more effort to keep them going in the civilian sector. Some received this treatment, many others didn't. And unfortunately, even many of those that didn't went on to be used as commercial passenger tour vessels. Another issue we can learn from, especially as a follow-up to what we know already about duck tours, if you've seen the previous videos, is to always keep an open mind and follow the facts. With everything we know about all the safety issues Ride the Ducks amphibians had over the years, much of which due to negligence, it would be easy to just put Duck 34's incident right in that same box, case closed. But as with anything I bring up in regards to safety, it's important to do the proper diligence before jumping to conclusions. Hirsch and Family Entertainment had been the sole owner of Ride the Ducks International since 2004. The Philadelphia location one of 6 as of summer 2010. Branson, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, Stone Mountain Park, Georgia, Newport, Kentucky. The Ride the Ducks brand had been around since 1977, so, founded in 2003, Philadelphia's operation was relatively new on the scene. As with other Ride the Ducks locations, they made use of the same vessels, modified to the same standards, as the rest of the company. Ride the Ducks International would modify the former World War II Army Duck amphibious transports to varying degrees. All vessels would get their power plants replaced and would add the generally similar canopies, rear boarding ladders, and operator and passenger seating arrangements. But for various reasons, Ride the Ducks created different variations in how they'd stretch the ducks to allow for this increased passenger capacity. Most commonly, they were lengthened to carry the additional passengers, and many were not otherwise built up or reinforced though, referred to as a stretch duck. Others received more robust bows, additions to their width and gunnel height, allowing for more freeboard and, it's thought, more reserve buoyancy, referred to as the master jig duck. The most glaring example of this difference being Duck 54's survival in the Branson incident, a master jig duck pushing through the exact same deadly conditions as Duck 7, a stretch duck, right alongside one another. Of the commercial amphibious vessels in the U.S., as of November 2010, The U.S. Coast Guard inspections show a large majority being World War II era Army DUKWs, both stretched and not stretched. Duck 34 was of the stretch duck variety. While tank barges appear similar to the more common inland barges seen on U.S. waterways, they're on average much longer, wider, and have a very high profile compared to their simpler open-hull counterparts. Most inland bulk barges can be moved in groups on U.S. rivers of anywhere from 2 to 40 units at a time, pushed from the rear and referred to as a tow, while specialized barges with greater dimensions and mass require more specialized handling, and often in single-unit tows only, just the one barge and its tugboat. Purpose-built for the City of Philadelphia Water Department by Trinity Marine Group, Nashville, in 1989, the Resource, a non-self-propelled sludge tank barge, was 250 feet in length, 50 feet wide, and 2,100 gross tons. Its freeboard, or height above the waterline when loaded, about 7.5 feet high at the bow and 4.5 feet at the stern. But the empty freeboard was 20 feet at the bow and 16 feet at the stern, exceptionally high for a barge. This vessel was one of 2 used by the City of Philadelphia to move wastewater sludge between their pollution control plant and a privately owned and operated recycling facility. Moving these vessels, or towing them, from point to point is typically performed by harbor tugs, with an upper wheelhouse perched much higher than that of the typical pusher tugs seen on inland waterways. The tank barge's height above the waterline, along with additional length and beam, requires that much extra effort to see over and around while navigating. The tugboat Caribbean Sea, built in 1961 by Equitable Shipyard of Madisonville, Louisiana, started its life as the Clinton C. Sannock. The vessel, purpose-built for coastal ocean towing, was of twin-screw, twin-rudder design, originally built with only the standard height single wheelhouse. The tugboat would change hands many times throughout its life, quite common for these vessels. At 79 feet long, 24 feet wide, and with a draft of 10 feet deep, it was powered by twin 1,200 horsepower diesel engines. The original height would be increased at some point throughout its life, when the upper wheelhouse was added to give operators a view roughly 35 feet above the waterline. The upper wheelhouse capable of independently controlling steering and throttles, and while the small enclosure did have heaters for the cold season, it was not equipped with air conditioning like the main wheelhouse. Foreshadowing for later in this video. The originally named Clinton C. Sannock changed names several times. In 1989, changed to the H.D. Campbell, 1994, the Peter M., 98, the Vivian L. Roerich. It's unclear exactly when this upper wheelhouse was added, but I've noticed it's in place as early as the vessel's Vivian Roerich chapter. Then in 2007, the Roerich would be purchased by KC Transportation Partnership of East Brunswick, New Jersey, where it was renamed to Caribbean Sea. When operating under KC Transportation, the crew of 5 would consist of the ship's captain, a licensed master, 1 licensed mate, 2 deckhands, and 1 licensed engineer. Each shift of 5 would live on the tugboat during its operations in and around the lower Schuylkill and Delaware River areas, with crew changeover taking place every 2 weeks. While offices and ticketing were located in the Philadelphia Bourse Building, the Ride the Ducks Philadelphia boarding location was more akin to that of a bus stop, where guests boarded and disembarked at 6th and Chestnut via the rear boarding ladders. Since this area of the city is so historic, the sightseeing drive, winding through the often narrow streets, was quite extensive, about 35 to 40 minutes long. Once the Ducks reached Race Street, this led them straight to their dedicated launch ramp, reserved exclusively for Ride the Ducks. Splashing in on the north side of the Race Street Pier, they would turn south once beyond the pier, required to remain within 1,000 feet from shore and no more than 300 yards away from each pier's east end. They'd be in the ship channel, but would be required to, according to the U.S. Coast Guard, stay well clear of the shipping lane traffic upon the Delaware River. Potential pre-planned points for either emergency egress or grounding were just south of the residential pier, inside the Penn's Landing Marina, or just beyond it to the south. At a point east of the marina's opening, the Ducks would turn around and head back north, exiting via the same dedicated ramp. The water tour, no more than 30 minutes total, then disembarking back at the 6th and Chestnut location. Ride the Ducks under Hirsch and Family Entertainment, though, in hindsight, is widely known to have been cutting corners in many areas. For example, from the beginning, they wanted to operate each duck tour with a single crew member, regardless of location. A licensed captain that would act as driver on land, pilot in the water, narrator, tour guide, and of course with no assistance, expected to be their own lookout throughout. The Ducks by their nature on road have several blind spots compared to that of typical passenger vehicles. For example, the large bow and driver's position combined with more cockpit obstructions than that of a normal vehicle of this size have led to multiple incidents in the past where vehicles, pedestrians, or motorcyclists have been struck, rear-ended, dragged, even killed, due in large part to lack of visibility while traveling through busy streets. And in the water, they are quite vulnerable due to their slow speed and relatively low amount of maneuverability, along with additional stability needs requiring operation in only the calmest of waters. The modified original Ducks have minimal freeboard when loaded and so on, a lot to manage, exacerbated in demanding locations. But contrary to some of the Ride the Ducks locations, and I believe which may have helped set a precedent for some of their other locations going forward, the Philadelphia Ducks were operating in a much busier water environment, the Delaware River, in the vicinity of Penn's Landing. The U.S. Coast Guard, aware of this and the Ducks' capabilities limited to calm, protected waters, issued a mandate in 2004 to Ride the Ducks Philadelphia, in their second year of operation, requiring them to add a second crew member to all tours, so that one crew member would always be free during the water transit to act as lookout, referred to in the maritime world as a deckhand. The Coast Guard was also much more active in the Delaware River area than, say, inland waters like Table Rock Lake and Branson, so operations like these were on their radar constantly. Ride the Ducks corporate, of course, fought this tooth and nail, penning a long-winded appeal. In their rejection letter responding to the company's appeal, the Coast Guard stating, "We make this decision based on a number of safety issues that are unique to operating on the Delaware River in the vicinity of Penn's Landing. Compared to the relatively benign operating environments of your other ducks, i.e. lakes and protected harbors with little or no commercial traffic, the Philadelphia operation involves a more hazardous environment, which presents added safety risks. The operating route is within close proximity of the shipping channel, where deep draft and towing vessels traverse on a regular basis, creating a heightened risk of collision or swamping. By your own admission, your operators must be careful to maneuver the vessel to minimize wake impact. Furthermore, with a maximum speed of perhaps 7 knots, the Ducks only have limited maneuverability, which is further exacerbated by river currents upwards of 4 knots. Finally, we're aware of at least 2 incidents last summer where debris caused damage to propellers, rudders, struts, and/or shafts. The amount of debris in the river poses an additional risk liability. When taken in combination, these risk factors lead us to conclude that your Philadelphia Duck operations require the addition of a deckhand." The Coast Guard would go on to say, "Beyond the elevated risks associated with the vessel route, we consider having 38 passengers an unwieldy number for one person to manage, particularly in the event of an emergency. Typically, small passenger vessel operations require employment of 1 or more deckhands, in addition to the licensed master, regardless of passenger capacity, vessel design, or route. Requests to drop the deckhand are considered on an individual basis. However, upon review of the entire fleet of small passenger vessels inspected in the OCMI Philadelphia zone, the most passengers allowed for a single pilot operation is 14. The master's primary focus needs to be on safe navigation of the vessel. Crowd control issues must not interfere with this duty. In the event of an emergency, the deckhand is available to assist with passenger control and emergency procedures, including handing out life jackets, relaying safety instructions, and keeping general order. Coupled with the added risk factors explained before, we consider the addition of a deckhand essential to safe operation of the Philadelphia Ducks." Also, in what appears to follow the pattern of Ducks modified by Ride the Ducks and their subsidiaries, the Philadelphia fleet was all too familiar with constant breakdowns and maintenance issues. June 2005, Duck 22 suffered a propulsion failure with passengers on board, when it struck a submerged object in the Delaware River, causing the propeller shaft yoke to break. The Coast Guard noting that neither the vessel nor the company notified authorities as the duck sat without propulsion on the Delaware. Fortunately, with no injuries, the vessel was likely towed to safety by a fellow duck eventually. August 2005. Duck 45 suffered engine failure on the Delaware near the Ben Franklin Bridge. Luckily, no injuries were reported, but the Coast Guard noted 36 passengers total being aboard at the time. May 2006. Duck 22 again experiences loss of propulsion while underway on the Delaware with 36 passengers on board. This time due to engine failure when a radiator hose dislodged, causing the engine to overheat and shut down. After sitting anchored, the vessel would be towed to safety and fortunately, no injuries were reported. May 2007. Duck 24 reports loss of main steering system while underway on the Delaware with passengers aboard. Fortunately, a manual backup control system was employed, and the vessel was able to make it back to the exit under its own power. July 2009. Duck 25 experienced loss of propulsion while underway on the Delaware with passengers aboard. Tied up to a pier near the Ben Franklin Bridge, they would end up being towed to safety by Duck 34. A portion of the propeller drive had sheared off while underway. Again, authorities were not notified, and it's suspected Ride the Ducks was attempting to resolve the situation without intervention. When the Coast Guard did intervene and inspected each vessel, Duck 25 and 34 were found to have both been operating beyond the expiration dates of their certificates of inspection. At a depth of 40+ feet, the Delaware River ship channel is navigable by ocean-going, deep-draft vessels of many types. Even just taking a quick look right near Penn's Landing itself, there are vessels berthed in and transiting the area, hulking in size, especially when compared to the average 33-foot amphibious duck. Not all barges of sizes similar to the Resource are built and transported in the same fashion, even amongst those operated by KC. Many are designed with what's called a push notch at the stern of the vessel. A standard tugboat, even one like the Caribbean Sea, utilizing a deep enough notch with integrated tugboat or ITB connections, can latch on, creating a single integrated tub barge unit. The ITB can operate in sea and weather conditions where conventional barges can't. When these barges are the same size as the Resource, they still require the added upper pilot house due to their high freeboard, but tend to be more workable, especially on longer journeys. The Resource and the Recycler, however, were two tank barges built specifically to only venture between the Northeast Water Pollution Control Plant on the Delaware River and the Biosolids Recycling Center on the Schuylkill River for the city of Philadelphia. A relatively short haul at about 11.7 nautical miles, not requiring open ocean transit. The water control plant loaded them regularly, with wastewater sludge which was offloaded at biosolids for processing. With only a shallow stern indentation, rather than a full ITB notch, short distance between docks, and frequency of moves, it meant these two were often pushed in a hip-toe configuration instead. On Wednesday, July 7th, KC Transportation was carrying out their contract for the city of Philadelphia to move the Resource and Recycler from their berth at Biosolids back to the water pollution control plant for reloading. Since they were empty, this meant their freeboard would be at its maximum height, 20 feet above the waterline at the bow. The tugboat Caribbean Sea was tied at the hip of the barge's port side, with the tugboat's starboard side pushed against it. While less favorable than the position of an ITB tow, this still allows for control over the vessel in all directions. Duck 34 would complete 2 tours on Wednesday, July 7th with no incident, returning from the second by 1:15 p.m. Boarding took place around 1:30 for Duck 34's third tour that day. In addition to the master was a total of 35 passengers, which included a group of 13 Hungarian students and their 2 teachers, all with varying levels of English comprehension. They were accompanied by their 7 local American hosts, amongst the other guests aboard. In interviews afterwards, a handful of passengers noting that safety briefings were given via voice only for the most part, far less demonstration and gesture-based compared to, say, airline briefings. The passengers ranged from 8 to 72 years old. Duck 44 boarded 32 passengers and got underway soon after number 34 departed. Reaching the duck ramp, the routine was to pick up the deckhand, just prior to entering the water. Both the captain and deckhand were licensed to operate the vessel during the water transit, alternating duties of narration, engaging with the guests, acting as lookout, and water piloting according to their company policies. Duck 34 would splash in at about 2:15, the master making a routine call-out on Channel 13, alerting local marine traffic to their presence. He would soon switch to the jump seat to act as tour guide and lookout while the deckhand took the controls. Of the 5 crew on board the tugboat Caribbean Sea, the master and deckhand number 1 were scheduled to be off duty and in their bunks, while the mate, second-ranking officer on board, deckhand 2, and the engineer remained on duty for the trip north. Prior to getting underway, though, the master had made clear to the mate his expectations of preferred positioning against the side of the barge, along with his expectations for the mate to use the upper wheelhouse for their transit northbound, due to the barge's high freeboard, while empty and near zero visibility forward of the vessel from the main wheelhouse. "No problem, you don't have to worry, that's normal, that's where I would be," the mate responded. The master and deckhand number 1 around this time would retire to their quarters for lunch and rest. Important to note, though, the NTSB points out that there was no written company policy with KC at the time, requiring which wheelhouse to navigate from when the sludge barges were empty, and that the master did not note these directions into his standing orders for the vessel either. It was later confirmed to have been made and acknowledged verbally only. Held fast in a starboard hip tow to the Resource's port side, the mate got the tow underway roughly 1 hour prior to Duck 34 splashing in, 1:15 p.m. The biosolids facility had recently finished unloading the barge, and they were en route back to the Northeast Water Pollution Control Plant. They'd make their way north in the river channel at a speed of about 6 knots. The high temperature that day, a miserable 103 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 Celsius, setting records as one of the hottest days in Philadelphia history. Duck 34 had completed their turnaround and was proceeding northward, back toward the exit ramp. Duck 44 behind and starboard by about 150 feet. At 2:25 p.m., with the deckhand at the helm, the captain, sitting in the jump seat, noticed what appeared to be smoke from the engine's starboard compartment vent. The deckhand and captain would switch positions. Once in the jump seat, the deckhand requested the nearest 4 passengers in the first row of seats step back to avoid the smoke. The captain took fire mitigation actions, closing both port and starboard engine vents, securing the ignition switch, activating the emergency fuel shutoff, and closing the forward hatch. The captain would stop short, though, of activating the fire suppression CO2 system, as he wasn't 100% sure whether it was smoke or just steam, and also didn't want the CO2 accumulating amongst the passengers. In interviews with authorities, the captain stated he immediately put out a call on VHF Channel 13 to all vessels in the vicinity. However, the NTSB finds no records of this call. Regardless, Duck 44 was within sight, and upon seeing 34's issues, maneuvered within hailing distance to offer assistance. Duck 34's crew let them know everything's good, and that the problem had been radioed in to the Ride the Ducks office. "Finish the tour, everything's all right," the deckhand told Duck 44's master. Duck 44 was also not fitted with the necessary equipment to perform a safe tow anyway. A manager from the offices using the Direct Connect radio informed the Ducks that number 46 was being dispatched separately to tow Duck 34. By this point, Duck 34 had already drifted a bit, so roughly 3 minutes after they'd shut down propulsion, the captain ordered the deckhand to go forward and drop the anchor. The anchor took about 4 minutes to set, dragging along the bottom about 155 feet before catching, anchoring the vessel close to the center of the navigation channel by about 2:33 p.m. On board the tugboat, the engineer had gone below decks to perform his underway maintenance duties. Having seen the upper wheelhouse occupied, confident the mate had lookout duty in hand, Deckhand number 2 would also go about his daily duties in other parts of the vessel. However, once underway, the mate immediately started placing numerous calls on his personal cell. Roughly 8 miles into the journey and nearing Penn's Landing, 18 calls on the mate's cell, both incoming and outgoing, had been made, of varying lengths, totaling about 53 minutes, which investigators would later discover and confirm were due to the mate dealing with a legitimate, serious family medical emergency. As the Resource and Caribbean Sea passed by Penn's Landing, the area on shore happened to be bustling with tourists and locals. The following pictures can be seen where the upper wheelhouse is clearly not occupied. The space is small enough such that a crew member present in these lighting conditions would very clearly be visible through these windows. Instead, on the phone, not in the upper wheelhouse, and having not requested Deckhand number 2 relieve his position as lookout, the mate was currently on a call that initiated at 2:32 p.m. as they passed in front of Penn's Landing. Just prior to this, Duck 34's crew first noticed the Barge and Caribbean Sea at roughly 1 nautical mile of separation, also claiming in a later interview to have placed another call out on VHF Channel 13 to alert local marine traffic of their situation. However, authorities were unable to verify this call as well. The distance, though, and perspective they had on the barge at the time gave them the impression it was taking maneuvers to avoid them. After the initial sighting was around the time the deckhand was ordered to go out on the bow and drop anchor. As the distance between the vessels closed and the anchor stopped their drift, the deckhand remained out on the bow, assumed to be sharing lookout duty by the captain, but hadn't been specifically ordered to do so. After all, standing atop the bow would allow for a much clearer view of the duckboat's surroundings. Instead, the deckhand would take out a cell phone and begin texting back and forth with a friend. In the meantime, the captain had finished manually sealing up additional compartment vents, typically used for heat dissipation. They were still allowing a bit of vapor to enter the passenger compartment, so he took the time to seal it off while they waited. With the vapors clear, the captain then had the 4 passengers originally from the front return to their seats. It was around this same time he looked up to see that the tow had actually not changed course and was bearing down on their vessel. With the bow of the Resource 2 minutes away, the captain began making calls out directly addressing the Caribbean Sea on Channel 13, to no avail. These calls are on record and confirmed by authorities. The passenger ferry Freedom, within sight of both vessels, also attempted to call out immediately after Duck 34's attempt, and then switched to Channel 16 to notify the Coast Guard. Some, but not all passengers, recalled hearing the captain give instructions to don life jackets, and in an interview with one of the survivors, one of the ladies from our church got up and she yelled, "We've got to move," and she started pulling down the life vests, and people started screaming, and other people were getting up and pulling life vests down, and that's right before the barge hit. Fortunately, many passengers followed the example of others. Although unable to fasten the life vest properly in such a short amount of time, they did have them in hand, or at least freed them from their placements in the canopy. The deckhand leapt from the bow of the Duck with no life jacket. In this configuration, though, and with what authorities felt was lacking instructions overall on emergency egress, along with an exceedingly delayed call for action by the captain, if any, no one but the deckhand escaped the vessel prior to impact. The barge struck the passenger vessel at 2:37 p.m., impacting on its stern and slightly to port. In a process that took about 10 seconds, the Duck was rolled over onto its starboard side and pushed completely underwater. The vessel would never resurface, sinking immediately in water roughly 55 feet deep. Now, according to the NTSB, most passengers could not recollect just how they'd evacuated and made it back to the surface. Many recounting that one moment they were underwater, the next back on the surface. Some said they remembered seeing sunlight eventually peeking through the water and swam towards it. For those who'd lost track of their life jackets, fortunately, there were many scattered about on the surface near where the victims popped up. Most found flotation nearby quickly. The ferry Freedom was on its normal river link route at this time, back and forth from Camden to Penn's Landing, and made their best possible speed toward the accident site. Upon arrival, they began assisting survivors and were quickly followed by 2 Marine police boats, 3 Coast Guard rescue boats, and a Navy team on a Zodiac, all of which on scene within just a few minutes. Many passengers were helped out of the water onto the boats, while others made it to shore and were helped by multiple first responders and Samaritans on scene as well. It probably goes without saying, but no one was injured aboard the Tugboat Caribbean Sea. In total, 26 Duckboat passengers suffered minor injuries according to the NTSB, and after exhaustive searches, 2 victims were never recovered on the day of the incident, a 20-year-old and 16-year-old, seated together in the second row on the starboard side, both from the group of Hungarian visitors. The Coast Guard and police searched tirelessly since the time of the incident, everyone hopeful they'd somehow survived. According to ABC Philadelphia and NPR, the first victim was finally found and their body recovered around 4:45 a.m., Friday, July 9th, 2 days later, just south of the Walt Whitman Bridge. The second victim recovered during the process of raising the sunken duckboat, about 3 p.m. that same afternoon. On board the tugboat, as the barge drove the passenger vessel underwater, the deckhand and engineer were sitting at a crew table on the port side of the galley. They felt a sudden reduction in the 2 engines' RPMs and assumed they'd arrived at their destination. Looking out the porthole, though, the deckhand saw what looked like people in the water off their port side. The 2 went to the main deck where they saw struggling victims and debris passing by their vessel to port and stern, pushed by the river current. The engineer rushed to the master's stateroom to alert him. Approaching in the passageway, he saw the stateroom door already open and the mate standing in the doorway. He heard no conversation taking place and witnessed an expression on the mate that appeared to be disbelief, like, is this really happening? The mate had knocked on the master's door to wake him up and told him, I ran over a duckboat. The master threw on what clothes he had found quickly and rushed to the upper wheelhouse, taking over the vessel. They'd passed upriver far enough that they could not assist with victims in the water, and the ferry Freedom had already made callouts to the Coast Guard on Channel 16. The master swung the tow to starboard and attempted to hold their position just upriver from the scene. After initial rescue and sweeps of the scene were complete, the Coast Guard units from Sector Delaware boarded the Caribbean Sea. 2 Coast Guard investigators interviewed the mate in the galley at about 3:44 p.m. At first, he'd informed investigators that he was in the upper wheelhouse at the time of the collision, but had not seen the duck prior. He also stated he did not hear any radio calls or see any targets on the tugboat's radar. The NTSB was also unable to verify any calls being made from the Caribbean Sea to any ducks in the area. Later in the evening, KC Transportation provided the mate an attorney, and the mate would invoke his right to the Fifth Amendment, refusing further interviews to any investigators, including the NTSB. At the mate's request, KC Transportation did provide the NTSB with a follow-up statement. The mate had informed them his young son experienced a life-threatening emergency during what was to be a relatively routine medical procedure that day. He had become consumed with dealing with this family crisis. He had also made no other crew members, including the master, aware that day that any of this was going on. Strangely, investigators also found the mate made the following entries in the tugboat's log. 1:15, underway with barge the Resource from Southwest Sludge Dock, but then 2:30 p.m., made rounds, engine room and security, all secure at Northeast Sludge Dock with the Resource. The tow, of course, never having arrived at the Northeast Sludge Dock during the expected time frame, let alone by 2:30. According to investigators, FBI forensics of the company-issued laptop, the one kept in the main wheelhouse, also revealed web searches starting around 2 p.m. and 2:20 p.m., along with subsequent following of those searches' results. Ride the Ducks Philadelphia suspended all tours immediately following this incident and kept operations suspended for the remainder of the 2010 season. With the Coast Guard and NTSB present, the duck boat was raised on July 9th, the NTSB taking possession immediately thereafter, the canopy framing still intact along with findings under the hood that caused the steam and subsequent lack of propulsion, which we will cover shortly. Although the NTSB found no issues in either vessel's crew with qualifications of crew members, fatigue, or drugs and alcohol use, and regarding the tugboat's potential to avoid the collision, no issues were found with weather and river conditions, waterway configurations, along with no issues in mechanical, electronic, and communications functions of the Caribbean Sea itself. Findings of primary cause by the NTSB did include the mate of the Caribbean Sea failing to maintain an appropriate lookout, including monitoring the radios, while navigating the vessel because he was distracted by personal use of his cell phone and the company laptop in dealing with the serious family medical emergency. Contrary to the master's instructions and contrary to his own post-accident statements, the mate of the Caribbean Sea was not navigating the vessel from the upper wheelhouse at the time of the collision. The mate of the Caribbean Sea should have been aware of his employer's prohibition of personal use of cell phones and company-provided computers while on watch, but on the day of the accident, he did not follow the policy. Had the mate of the Caribbean Sea informed the master or management at KC Transportation of the serious family medical emergency, he would likely have been granted relief from the watch. Secondary and contributing to the incident, according to the NTSB, the Duck 34 surge tank pressure cap was not in place at the time of the accident, and the missing pressure cap allowed the engine coolant to boil and create steam that entered the passenger compartment and prompted the master to shut down the engine because he believed he had an onboard fire. The mechanics who performed post-trip inspections of Duck 34 failed to ensure that the surge tank pressure cap was securely in place before allowing the vehicle to enter passenger service. Duck 34 master did not fully appreciate or appropriately respond to the risk of a collision that faced Duck 34 and its occupants once he had shut down the vessel's engine and anchored in the navigable channel. Duck 34 deckhand's personal use of his cell phone to send text messages while he was on the bow of the vessel distracted him from effectively performing his duty as lookout. After a series of trials and then pleading guilty in autumn of 2011 to one count of misconduct of a ship causing passenger death, the mate of the Caribbean Sea admitted he was distracted by his cell phone and the laptop for an extended period of time prior to the collision. Admitting to piloting from the main wheelhouse and not monitoring the marine radio frequencies during that time, that he intentionally lowered the volume to where it was inaudible so that he could concentrate and better hear his phone conversations, along with remaining in the main wheelhouse as it was air-conditioned, quieter, and feeling panicked and nauseated, allowed him to concentrate better, tending to his family emergency. Apologizing to the victims' families, breaking down several times while on the stand. The mate sentenced to 1 year in prison that began in January of 2012. As 2011 approached, for their part, Ride the Ducks Philadelphia did attempt to create a new route on the Schuylkill River, which I'm assuming would have been upriver from the weir, as barge traffic stops at that point, on a peaceful portion of the water nearby the Schuylkill River Trail. It's reported, though, by several local news outlets, and Ride the Ducks themselves, the city of Philadelphia did not approve this request, and when 2011's warm season approached, the Ducks resumed operations on the Delaware, but reportedly kept a rescue boat ready nearby and shortened the water transit overall. From the Ride the Ducks Philly Ducks Facebook page posted on October 6, 2016. As of October 5, 2016, Ride the Ducks Philadelphia has suspended operations indefinitely. As the nation's largest amphibious tour operator and licensor, our mission is serving through sightseeing. We offer guests an experience that is fun, informative, and engaging so that we can serve our employees and communities. Due to circumstances outside of our control, including a 330% increase in our insurance premiums, continued operations in Philadelphia are not financially feasible at this time. We enjoyed serving the people of Philadelphia since 2003, serving over 1 million guests during that time. we are working with the 42 full and part-time employees from our Philadelphia location, offering severance and outplacement assistance. We regret having to close our operation, and we send good wishes and brotherly love to the people of Philadelphia. From the NTSB's Recommendations. To the U.S. Coast Guard, develop and implement an investigative protocol that directs your investigation officers to routinely check for non-operational use of cell phones and other wireless electronic devices. Revise your commercial vessel accident database to maintain a record of non-operational use of those same devices. Regulate and enforce the restriction on non-operational use of these devices until you can develop regulations governing non-operational use of cell phones and other wireless electronic devices by on-duty crew members in safety-critical positions. Continue your outreach program of information and education to the maritime industry on this issue. To Ride the Ducks International. Review Ride the Ducks International's existing safety management program and develop improved means to ensure that your company's safety and emergency procedures are understood and adhered to by employees in safety-critical positions. To KC Transportation Partners. Review KC Transportation's existing safety management program and develop improved means to ensure that your company's safety and emergency procedures are understood and adhered to by employees in safety-critical positions. To operators in American waterways in general. Notify your members of the circumstances of this accident and encourage them to ensure that their safety and emergency procedures are understood and adhered to by employees in safety-critical positions. The city of Philadelphia would also begin requiring separate lookouts on the bow of barges as a result. In stark contrast is the Boston Duck Tour's water route, from my contact representing Boston Ducks. The traffic on the Charles River in our area is mainly pleasure boating. The only commercial traffic is from 2 tourism boat companies upriver from us, so it's a very calm and serene spot we operate on. And indeed, this spot on the Charles is less prone to storms than, say, Table Rock Lake, and is not navigable by ocean-going or really any large craft. But as it pertains to the Ride the Ducks brand, remember, it is defunct now. This is not to say that there are no more duck tours operating around the world. Many of the issues related to duck tours using original World War II Army ducks stemmed from, what I can gather, negligence on behalf of Ride the Ducks International. Like we touched on earlier with Boston's duck tours, amphibious tours can be performed with more safety and reliability built in, but it takes a ton of honest, meticulous effort and purpose-built vessels, especially since old ducks that other operators may still use, they're not getting any younger. Work both behind the scenes during the ride, during the off-season, training, routine maintenance, and so on is all crucial in amphibian tours. So you might know by now how much I like my NTSB op-eds, so here goes. On the ramming of Duck 34, the NTSB chairman at the time closed the report stating, "It is time to change public tolerance for distracted operations and elevate society's opprobrium, reproach or criticism for transportation operators who use personal electronic devices. This behavior is unsafe and unacceptable." On July 7, 2010, the Caribbean Sea Tugboat Barge combination ran over a sightseeing boat loaded with passengers on the Delaware River in Philadelphia. Although the mate made 13 outgoing calls and received 5 incoming calls in the 80 minutes prior to the accident, the tugboat's crew members did not report the mate's repeated use of his personal cell phone. They likely did not report it because they are used to this type of behavior. The fact that the mate repeatedly made and received calls unrelated to vessel operations showed that he too was comfortable with this behavior. Further, the mate spoke on his cell phone when other people were nearby. The potential for co-workers to observe him violating company policy did not deter his inappropriate behavior, nor was the company's clear policy against using personal electronic devices a deterrent. The NTSB has seen pervasive use of personal electronic devices across all modes of transportation. Perhaps the best-known aviation instance was when 2 airline pilots were out of radio communication with air traffic control for more than an hour because they were using their personal laptop computers. They overflew their destination by more than 100 miles and only realized their error when a flight attendant inquired about their arrival over the intercom. The NTSB identified distraction due to text messaging as the cause of a September 12, 2008 commuter train engineer running a red signal near Chatsworth, California. The result? A head-on collision with a freight train. 25 people died and dozens were injured. The engineer, who had a history of using his cell phone for personal communications, sent 136 and received 114 text messages while on duty during the 3 days leading up to the accident. Distractions, as we all know, are a growing concern in our motor vehicles, especially as the handheld info and infotainment options in our vehicles increase. The consequences can be deadly. In one accident the NTSB investigated, in the 24 hours preceding the accident, the driver of a tractor-trailer truck made 97 calls and received 26 calls. In the half hour preceding the crash, the driver spent 14 minutes, nearly half his time, on the phone. 10 people died that day after the truck crossed the median. Even with company policies, widespread public education campaigns, and in some places, laws to minimize distractions like cell phone use, many people continue to think, "I'll make this quick call," or "I'll send a brief text message." The technology that created these problems also offers a potential to provide solutions. But as a society, how do we convey to manufacturers and operators that distractions at the wheel, helm, controls are just as unacceptable as driving under the influence? When will we say, "This must stop, we cannot do this anymore"? Here's a long view of transportation that may shed light on a path to address distracted operations. In 2006, the NTSB received a request from a historian to reconsider one of the first aviation accidents that the board investigated. The 1967 accident involved a Piedmont Airlines Boeing 727 and a private twin-engine aircraft that had a mid-air collision over North Carolina. All 82 people on board both planes were killed. The cockpit voice recorder identified that shortly after takeoff, the flight crew of the 727 discussed one of the cockpit ashtrays being on fire. As they put out the fire, the crew joked with the captain about burning his steak at that night's barbecue. However, smoking or burning cigarette ashtrays were such a common occurrence back then that the board did not even mention the event in the final report. In this time and culture, can you even begin to imagine smoking in an airplane, much less in the cockpit? What changed since 1967? The culture changed. We do not allow smoking on airplanes. It is not even remotely considered. The consequence, society's disapproval, is that strong. I want our society to reach the point when texting or telephoning, whether you're operating a vessel, a train, or a motor vehicle, is just as unacceptable as smoking in a cockpit, or not wearing a seatbelt, or driving under the influence of alcohol. Culture change is possible. It has happened before. It must happen again, now. How many more lives will be lost before our society corrects its deadly acceptance of distractions? So, as with all my content, I hope you guys are able to learn a bit. I know I did in researching this particular incident. I really appreciate you sitting through this with me and letting me kind of work this out for the first time. I mean, yeah, I've been practicing, but I haven't done an actual live stream like this ever, so this is a first for me. So, a couple specific shout outs to the top tier motor supporters on Patreon. That's Alex S., Andrew M., Kenneth P., Nathan F., Paul R., another Paul R., Philip B., Robert G. And thanks to everyone that became a mortar supporters during the stream. Had a bunch of that. I've used up enough of your guys' time. So with that, thanks again, Anna, for moderating. Thanks for all of you coming out here and showing up and asking all the questions. It's been so awesome to see you. Some of the familiar names out there from even a year or two back. I really appreciate all the support. You guys mean so much to me. So in closing, don't be afraid to learn something new, change your mind, or even challenge your own mental model. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're all caught in the churn. So believe in yourself, because you're important and your safety matters. Till next time, everyone, be safe out there. Bye.